and good afternoon, and welcome to the April 20th, 2023 Planning Commission hearing. I will call the hearing to order right now at 1 o'clock. Mrs. Sparza, can we please have a roll call?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll go ahead and take a roll call. Chair Bonderson?
Yes, here.
Vice Chair Bauke is absent. Commissioner Boss?
Here.
Commissioner DeLuccio?
Here.
Commissioner Lodge?
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow?
Here.
And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to our preliminary matters. So let's start with the requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or ex-agenda items. Mr. Busk, do we have any of those?
We do not.
No, thank you. And do we have any announcements or appeals?
Also none.
Wonderful. So we can go ahead and move on to number C, review, consideration, and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions. And those are for April 6th, 2023, and resolution number 002-23-23, and that's for 2501 Medcliff Road. I'll open this up to my fellow commissioners. Do any of you have any comments on this one? Does not look like we have any comments. Are there any public speaker comments for any of the minutes or resolutions? Mrs. Sparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do not have any in-person speaker slips and no raised hands to speak on the minutes approval. Thank you. Back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have a motion for the April 6th and minutes and the resolution 00203? I have Commissioner Wardlow, please.
I'd like to make a comment.
Wait, turn on your mic.
Sorry. I'd like to make a comment on the Garden Street minutes. Is that appropriate now, or are we moving all of the minutes at the same time?
We're going to do them one by one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have any comments on Medcliff Road?
No, thank you.
No. I have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the minutes as submitted and the resolution.
Wonderful, thank you. Commissioner DeLuccio,
And I'll
please.
second that motion.
Thank you. Mrs. Sparza, would you go ahead and take excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. We would like to have a discussion on this item. Are there any comments here now? Commissioner Wardlow?
Regarding the Garden Street project, I have specific comments that I was just wanting to ask staff about having them reflected in the minutes.
Can you hold on one second? Mr. Busk, do we comment on Garden Street separately? Or is it all part of this? Because the address is indicated as Medcliff Road.
So, I'm sorry, Chair Bonderson, so is that resolution number 002 dash?
No, I believe it's just for the minutes. Can I go ahead and separate these, and we can do the minutes separate from the resolution?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, why don't we hold on? I want to double check with Commissioner Lodge. May I ask you again, would you like to make a motion on the resolutions that have to do with only Medcliff Road? And we can vote on that?
Madam
We have to
Chair,
do the minutes
that
first.
was my intent.
Okay, so I will come back to you in a
And the
moment.
relevant resolution.
Okay, thank you. Excuse my process here. We have to do the minutes first, and that is separate from the resolution, so thank you for your patience. I'll have you go ahead, Commissioner Wardlow, and do all your comments now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for staff, just clarifying on the minutes. I feel that, a large part of the discussion on this topic was centered on the importance or need, as required by the 1983 report, that there be a housing study conducted by the applicant to explain kind of how this will impact our housing market. That wasn't presented, and I think there was some confusion on behalf of the applicant if that was required, but I thought that from the discussion by the commission that it was clear that we wanted to ensure that that came forward when the applicant comes back, as I didn't understand how it came before us without that study as part of their packet.
Commissioner Wardlow, you are correct that that was part of the discussion, and several commissioners did mention it. However, it was not listed in the motion, which is why it wasn't included. But I can certainly let the applicant know that that's still something that you're interested in.
I think that would be important just to clarify, because obviously we've seen some media coverage where there's been confusion about that report, and I think from our perspective that it was required, so I just, and if I'm wrong, please, please correct me, but that was my understanding.
And Chair Bonderson, you have the option to amend the minutes to reflect that and bring it back, or you can, do not have to amend the minutes. You can just, we'll contact the applicant. So the commission has either option to consider here.
Excellent. I will go ahead and open it up for discussion and see what the majority of our planning commissioners would like to do. Which of the two processes would you like to move forward with? Commissioner DeLuccio?
I would want to amend the minutes because it was a very important component of the discussion. It wasn't part of the motion, however, but it was loud and clear that we wanted at least the applicant to come back and explore it further or come back with some kind of explanation why it's not possible to do it.
Thank you. And Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. My understanding was that the housing study should be part of the application, so it shouldn't come back without it.
Excellent. Okay, well, is that all you need, Mr. Busk, to be able to move forward with that comment, and we can amend it? So just to make sure my process is accurate, do we just move forward with approving the minutes and resolution for Medcliff Road exclusively at this time? As amended, okay.
Correct, and that additional comment, it would be added as a comment, not added into the motion.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So with that, I would like to open this back up to Commissioner Lodge, if you would like to amend your motion and move it forward.
I move to approve the minutes.
Perfect.
uh,
And the
as
resolution?
amended.
And the resolution for
And the
Medcliff?
related resolution.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
As amended.
The resolution?
Well, the resolution wasn't amended.
No, the minutes as amended.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I didn't miss that.
I'll second that.
Okay, and we have Commissioner Wardlow seconding. So this comes back to you. Mrs. Sparza, would you go ahead and help us with a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll go ahead and take the roll call vote. Commissioner Boss,
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
and Chair Bonderson.
Yes, thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to item D, that's public comment pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. Do we have any, Mrs. Sparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Currently, I do not have any speaker slips for general public business public comment. If anyone participating virtually would like to speak on general business, please raise your hand and we can call on you. Not seeing any raised hands, we did receive written correspondence from Ernest Solomon and Sunita Bial, which was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. Back to you.
Thank you so much. All right, well, without further ado, we'll move on to our new item. That's the Airport Master Plan. And I am going to just open it up to staff to present one by one who will be speaking, and introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson and commission members. I am Chris Hastert, the airport director, relatively new, been here for about 6 months, and happy to give you a presentation on our process to update our master plan. Just wanted to make a quick note that we are not presenting a master plan to you. We're giving you an update on what that process is as we develop this master plan. With me today is Jessica Metzger, our project planner at the airport, Sarah Iza, our airport development manager, and I don't see him here, but definitely helping us with this project is Brad Cleansing, our supervising engineer. As a part of our team, we also have expert help from an aviation consulting group, Mead and Hunt, and we have Corbett Smith, who unfortunately was not able to attend today, but he is our project manager. We have Hardy Bullock sitting right here, who is the deputy project manager, and Brian Moore, the national planning practice lead with Mead and Hunt. Today, we're going to give you a little bit of some information, like I said, on the process to update our master plan. It is going to cover the background of our master plan that we currently have, as well as what we're looking to update, technical progress that we have made so far, stakeholder engagement, which is a very, very important part of this process, and the next steps as we move forward. Just a little bit of a background, as I'm sure some of you have participated or been aware, we do have a 2017 master plan that was adopted. That plan was looking towards the future, as all master plans do. So as we go into the master plan update, we're looking to look for a 20-year planning document that we update approximately every 5 to 10 years. And so being at the front end of that last master plan, it's really because of some of the changes that have happened at the airport and some of the activity that has grown a little bit faster than forecasted back when they were looking at the 2017 master plan. We'll be using information as we look to do this update from 2011 through 2022, and looking at changing conditions for the region, but also the industry and FAA changes that have come out for compliance as well. And this master plan will give us a clear path forward as we see growth at the airport or changes at the airport, to be able to anticipate them and plan for the capital projects that are required so that they don't all hit us at the same time, and we can plan out the cash flow and how that works and apply for grants and other funding. What a master plan is, as I mentioned, it's a 20-year planning document that we update approximately every 10 years. We look at capital improvement projects and land use compatibility. This update and the plan is sponsored by the FAA. We do receive an FAA grant, so with that we actually have to follow their standards for how a master plan should be put together. And it's focused on the long-term development potential for the airport. What a master plan is not. This is not a business plan or a marketing plan. So this isn't something that we're putting together to try to attract new airline use or build new facilities. This is really looking at what the needs of the airport are and planning for that appropriately. It's not a wish list or a funding guarantee for future projects. It's not a binding document. This is just, as I mentioned, a guiding document so that as demand and as conditions change at the airport, we have thought about it ahead of time and aren't just in a reactionary mode. It's not a document that sets policies or rates. It's not an engineering level document, although our airport layout plan that is a part of this may look similar to an engineering type document. It doesn't get into that level of detail. And it's not a rigid blueprint for future development, and the projects that are recommended in the master plan as we go through that obviously all go back through a process with the decision makers and policy makers. The master plan goals for us as staff as we go through it are to prepare, promote, address, and involve. So we want to prepare the airport for the coming trends in aviation and identify what the forecast is for the next 20 years and plan for that accordingly. We want to promote the airport with financial resiliency. We want to address the balance of the airport facility needs with the continued protection of our environmental resources and our cultural resources, including the Goleta Slough. We've heard a lot more about the General Western Aero hangars, Chumash cultural resources in and around our area, so that's definitely very important to us as we look to move forward with the airport. And we want to involve on and off airport stakeholders. So that involves everybody from the communities surrounding the airport, the citizens who use the airport, the citizens who are concerned about noise, the on-airport stakeholders, including all of the businesses, air traffic control, you name it. We want input from everybody as we develop this plan so that we can make sure we're addressing all of the needs for all of the different communities out there. The guiding principles as we look through this update are for priority is safety and security. Obviously, we want to run an airport that is safe and secure and not have major issues that highlight Santa Barbara as a bad place to fly in or out of. Economic vitality, so we don't want to rely just on one industry, such as the airlines, to support the airport. We want some diversity so that we make sure that we are successful into the future. Transportation diversity, so this is an area that looks at how people get to and from the airport, where they're parking, so that should be buses, bikes, you name it, all included in this study. The community, which I mentioned, which involves everybody on and off airport. Sustainability, so we'll be looking a lot more for electrification, which reduces greenhouse gases, things like that. Environmental protection, or preservation, as I mentioned, we live in at the airport, we are in a very unusual area with how much environmental issues we have in and around us, being right at the Goleta Slough, where all of the streams and everything drain right into the ocean. So it's different than a lot of airports that are out there. and as I already mentioned, the cultural resource protection as well. So kind of where we have been and where we're going, we did a project kickoff with the Airport Commission. We have already begun public outreach and engagement. We have 2 committees that have had 2 meetings so far. It's a community input committee, and that has involved planners from all of our partner agencies around the airport and other agencies, Goleta Sanitary District, everybody involved. We also had a technical input committee, and that is the on-airport stakeholders that I mentioned. So TSA, FAA, the Air Traffic Control Tower, the airlines, the fixed base operators who handle the corporate jets coming in and out, the flight school, all of those were on the technical input committee. We will be developing conceptual designs, so that is one of the next steps, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And so those conceptual designs are based off of all of the input that we receive from all of the stakeholders. This is not something that me as the airport director or Jessica and Sarah as the planners for the airport are pushing an agenda that we have. We are really looking for the community and what's best for the airport. We will come up with an implementation plan that also addresses what are the fiscal impacts for all of the capital projects that are identified, and trying to make sure that we are planning for that accordingly and to seek what grants or other funding may be required. There will be a noise analysis that is done as a part of this master plan. It isn't directly to address the noise concerns that some of the residents have. It's really to look at how we currently are with a change, with whatever change is in the master plan, and looking at that difference and seeing how that difference affects noise at the airport. But having said that, I will say that noise is an important issue that the airport is looking into, and is definitely a concern of some of our residents. And we are addressing that in other ways besides just this document that goes forward. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this will come back for decision-making hearings. So just because it's in the master plan and it's based off of the demand and what the facilities are needed, other than potential compliance issues with the FAA, a lot of these will come back and the public policymakers will be making decisions on these projects. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Hardy Bullock to go over some of the technical details.
Thank you. Chair and honorable commissioners, thanks for having us here today. It's been a pleasure to work with the airport staff. It's been a great experience, and they've supported us along the way. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the process, a little bit about the data, and how we came up with the forecast methodology that my colleague Brian's going to talk about. He's going to tell you a little bit about the number of operations, the number of employments, how that data was formulated, and how that translates into some of the elements in the master plan that we have here. The master plan is really an 18-month process that started in summer of 2022. The blue boxes are essentially the chapters within the plan. And so starting on the left, we have the inventory, what's the built environment, what is the airport currently existing in what state. And then we have the environmental overview, the aviation forecast that Brian's going to tell us a little bit about. The brown circles indicate the Technical Advisory Committee and the Community Advisory Committee, Technical Input Committee and Community Input Committee that Director Hastert has noted. The green boxes are areas for public input. So for example, the meetings we've had plus the meeting we have tonight is the green circle indicated in spring of 2023 for facility requirements. The aviation forecast I'll mention was disseminated to the community without comment. The airport or the consultant team did not receive any comments on the aviation forecast that Brian's going to show you here in a little bit. That gets translated into the facility requirements, and is the airport prepared to meet the expected demand? And then the alternatives, the design alternatives, land use planning, and financial feasibility all culminate into the other portion of the airport master plan that is accepted or certified by the FAA, and that is the airport layout plan. And next slide, please. Thank you. So the central questions we ask ourselves when conducting a master plan is how busy will the airport be in 20 years? Again, we're going to talk about that in a minute. What are the future trends and challenges in aviation? Aviation is changing. The fleet mix of the type of aircraft that we travel on is changing. Higher use of narrow-body aircraft such as the 737. Those are coming to communities and changing the passenger load at airports. What are the terminal facility needs? The terminal meaning the passenger terminal where you go in. Does it require additional concessionaire areas, passenger circulation, restaurants, passenger amenities, and the passenger experience at the airport is all under consideration in the terminal facility needs, which is being studied by an additional company and being threaded into the master plan document. What are the vehicle and access and parking needs, so circulation on the land side? And then what are the highest and best uses for airport property? And that includes the airport proper that we think of today. We'll show you a map in a minute. And then also non-aeronautical property owned by the airport just to the north in the business park area. And what opportunities are there for revenue growth? I'll just mention that the FAA does have a mandate that airports are self-sustaining. So the airport, and Chris and his team are constantly thinking about ways to diversify revenue and make the airport self-sustaining on its own. So this is the study area. Obviously, you recognize that map. The central crosshatched, or the cross in the middle, is essentially the intersection of the two main runways, two crosswind runways, north-south, and the main runway, east and west. So that's the airfield, the aircraft movement and non-movement area that includes the runways, parallel and perpendicular taxiways. And then you have the environmental inventory areas, the areas of concern marked in green. Below that, support and non-aeronautical, kind of that darker peach color in the top, that would include the aircraft rescue and firefighting fire stations. And then you have non-aeronautical, the blue business park that I mentioned in the north there. General aviation is also a special study area that will be blended into our master plan to understand. General aviation includes business jets, charter, Part 91K fractional owned aircraft and also the small propeller driven aircraft that you'd see, for example, in a training or flight training school. And then finally, you have in purple the air cargo area, and then the terminal area, what we think of as the passenger loading and unloading area, landside, airside interface in yellow in the bottom. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brian Moore to talk a little bit about the forecast.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. The 20-year forecast is an assessment of aviation activity looking into the future. I'm going to start with passenger activity. On the far left of the slide, we see that annual passengers are expected to grow from 1.2 million passengers accommodated in 2022 to about 1.8 million passengers accommodated in roughly 2041. So last year, the airport did have a record year and accommodated, again, just over 1.2 million annual passengers. What does that translate into in terms of aircraft takeoffs and landings, what we refer to as operations? In the middle of this top row of the slide, we see that the airport had about 10,000 landings and takeoffs by passenger and air cargo airlines in calendar year 2022. We expect that to grow to approximately 18,000 takeoffs and landings by airliners. In the lower right corner, we cover a topic called critical aircraft. This is an FAA mandate that the airport identify the critical aircraft. Think of the critical aircraft as the most demanding aircraft or airplane that uses the airport on a routine and regular basis. They're looking for the airplane that has at least 500 annual operations per year. In this case, the critical aircraft today and in the next 20 years is expected to be the Boeing 737-800. The Boeing 737, as Hardy mentioned, is a single-aisle, narrow-body airplane. If you've flown Southwest Airlines, it's the only model that Southwest Airlines flies. It single aisle with 2 or 3 seats on either side. That is important for a master plan because it dictates much of the airfield geometry. How much pavement is out there? How thick is the pavement? How strong is the pavement? What are the radii at different turns on the field? That's what FAA is looking for when you identify the critical aircraft. Turning our attention to the other segment of the market that we forecast is general aviation. This is all of the airplanes and activity that's occurring that is not passenger airline or air cargo related. Think of private jets, recreational planes, flight training operations. That's the field of general aviation. What we see in Santa Barbara is common throughout the United States right now, which is that general aviation did see an uptick in activity related to the pandemic. It's had a little bit of a renaissance in recent years as some people that flew commercial began to fly privately. We do see that those operations stabilizing here in Santa Barbara and growing at a steady rate going forward. In addition, we look at the number of airplanes that are based on the airport. These are airplanes that call Santa Barbara home. They are located mostly in hangars on the airport And we look to how many and what type of airplanes are here today. And in this case, there are approximately 140 airplanes on the airport today. And how many do we expect to be based at the airport, say, 20 years from now? And we expect approximately 180 planes on the field. That's important as we look to provide homes for that demand on the field for those that would like to base their airplane here. Going into a little bit more detail regarding the passenger forecast, which drives much of the demand at the airport, we expect enplaned passengers to grow at about 5%. When we say enplaned passengers, that's one way. That's outboard passengers, so people that are leaving Santa Barbara to go somewhere. On the left-hand side of the graph, you see the historical activity, and on the right-hand side, you see the forecast activity. We're looking from the period 2011 to 2021 in the center of the graph where the dashed vertical line is. And what you see here is the effect of the pandemic. So in 2019, many airports, including Santa Barbara, saw a peak activity in the year 2019. I don't know, if the summer of 2019, if you traveled, you probably experienced a delay. You were probably stranded somewhere. It was a very, very busy time. The airport accommodated just under 500,000 enplanements that year. In this case, Santa Barbara saw a drop from about 500,000 to about 300,000 annual enplanements in the low year of 2020, which compared to the nation was not that big of a drop. A lot of airports went from a 98% drop in passengers in 2020. What the airport has experienced, as I mentioned previously, is in 2022, while that's shown as a historical number, that is a real actual result from calendar year 2022 at just over 600,000 enplanements. And that's the reason you see the forecast jumping up from its low, the trough that was the experience in 2019. Going forward, we expect the growth to moderate at the airport. You wouldn't expect that curve to continue because it really reflects more of a recovery and not continued sustained organic growth. So we see again, the passenger enplanements growing to just under 900,000 enplanements, or again, 1.8 million total annual passengers. This forecast is based on two factors. One is in the near term, it's based on airline decision making. So what are the airlines thinking of doing in Santa Barbara with their fleet? What nonstop destinations would they like to serve? Which airplanes are they going to fly? And things of that nature. In the long term, it's more driven by demographics, such as population, per capita income, gross regional product, and the local economy here in the region. This is a tabular summary of some of the same data. The top row is enplanements. We've already covered that, so I'll turn our attention to operations. These are, again, takeoffs and landings by a variety of different segments of the market. I'll just, again, point out that operations are growing from about 100,000 in 2021 to about 116,000 in 2041. This growth, you can see historically that the airport was at 106,000 operations in 2011. And the reason that's notable is a lot of airports are seeing this. Operations do not grow like passengers. Airlines add larger planes to serve new demand. And the volatility of general aviation activity in the past has kept operations relatively flat throughout the country. And so we see that here in Santa Barbara, and that's the reason why you only expect another 13,000 annual operations at the airport 20 years from now. I will turn it back to Hardy for more interesting topics. Thank you for your time today.
So we have this slide to just talk a little bit about the airfield proper. Non-standard conditions, think legal non-conforming in the Planning Commission world. So airports have a long lifespan, the pavement has a long lifespan, and the regulatory environment and the framework for standard conditions that the FAA mandates was different when the airport was built. So as we look at the master plan, we consider all of the different criteria associated with the safe operation of the airfield, and we make incremental changes and improvements to that. Thank you. So you see things like the green bubbles where you can intersect the runway at the midpoint. That's no longer acceptable or supported with the FAA regulation as it stands today. turning radiuses of 90 degrees so that when the pilot approaches the perpendicular intersection that he can see equally out of both sides of the aircraft for approaching aircraft, particularly on the movement areas like the runways and parallel taxiways. We have large expanses of pavement, which is the yellow Papa and Golf areas on the right-hand side of the slide. And that's because the FAA doesn't like to see aircraft become disoriented or lost when maneuvering and taxiing on the ground with large expanses of pavement. They put pieces of grass in there. It also enhances permeable surfaces, and it's better for stormwater in the environment. So as we look at the airport master plan, we're looking at all of these engineering design concepts to improve and modernize the airport. Doesn't build capacity, only responds to the safety and the usability of the airfield. So some of the other facilities identified for siting and planning during a master planning process, we talked about the geometric design of the taxiways and runways. Also the crosswind consolidation, this was visited extensively in the 2017 master plan. So there's 2 crosswind runways parallel north-south. And our planning process will let us understand if there are 2 of them required or there's a justification that one of them be removed and consolidated down to 1. This plan, this process will be included in the master planning process, so the outcome of that plan will give us some insight on whether that runway can be supported if the FAA chooses to or does not choose to. Replacement of the airport traffic control tower. Hangars and based aircraft accommodation. One thing to understand with hangars and based aircraft is that if there is demand and aircraft want to come here and drop a passenger off, if there's no hangar for them to stay overnight, they'll fly the airplane away and come back. It's called repositioning. So choosing to design and develop hangars on the airfield that can actually reduce operations and impact to the community under some circumstances. So just one little note there. Terminal improvements that we talked about earlier, landside access and parking, and expansion of fuel facilities to provide fuel for both airline and general aviation fleet. There's discussion about airport administration and relocation, where the current airport admin building is. It's prime real estate for airside uses. It's directly up against the fence where airplanes park, so that's really usable from the airport's perspective. There could be other areas appropriate for the administration building. Vertiport for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, VTOL aircraft. I think you've all heard about these. They're electric aircraft. Think of a drone that you could put a package or a passenger in. They take special facilities, and they also take a lot of electrical capacity. So electrical capacity and airport electrification has been discussed a lot in our industry, and that's a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and bringing some new and innovative type of transportation services to the airport. The cargo and apron design for a change in aircraft type. FedEx is changing the type of aircraft they use to move packages, although cargo at the airport isn't forecasted to significantly change in the planning period. Aircraft rescue and firefighting, ARF, may change. The index required to safely accommodate aircraft at Santa Barbara may change, which may necessitate changes to the aircraft rescue and firefighting facilities. Drainage improvements, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and then obstruction removal based on airspace analysis. It's important that the vertical built environment around an airport is safe for aircraft coming and going. You don't want to build antennas, buildings, you don't want trees or things of that nature. So our master plan will look and map. Airport's geographic information system will let us understand where those obstructions are and how the airport team may mitigate them or prevent their installation in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica with the airport.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So in addition to working on this master plan update, the Engineering and Planning Division of the airport is pretty busy with some other projects as well. And the first one is the Terminal Improvement Project. That's being worked on by a consultant named Corrigan. And this actually came out of the 2017 master plan. So to give you an idea of how long these projects can go to get started from the original master plan adoption. So when we come back to you with the master plan for review as a document, just realize that it takes a while for all of these projects to come to fruition. We're also working on improvements to the general aviation redevelopment area with a company called Jacobs. So once again, those are the planes that are not commercial in nature, so think of anything else on the airport. And then additionally, we have approved and will be starting construction this summer on the Southfield redevelopment, which is parking on the south of the airport. Primarily, we'll be moving where the current rent-a-car spaces are down further towards the beach. And also, it will include 3 areas for planes to stay overnight in, which we don't have a lot of options for that right now, and it's something that is interesting for the airlines. And then we're also working on a drainage master plan update with Mead and Hunt. So our team here has another division that's working on that with us. And the sea level rise adaptation plan, which is being done with ESA, who did the city's sea level rise adaptation plan back in 2019. So they have a good idea of what is needed. And the drainage master plan and the sea level rise plan are working in conjunction to make sure we use our best data to analyze all of the options that we may have to deal with climate change. And then finally, we have the airfield marking, signage, and lighting plan. And so that is part of a requirement by FAA to have all airports come in conformance with new signage and lighting standards. And so we'll be working on that as well. And so the next steps in our master plan process are to finalize the facilities requirements, and then we'll be reviewing alternative analysis, much like you do in an EIR. And then we'll take the land use planning input. And throughout this process, as Chris said earlier, we'll be having many public meetings where you can have an opportunity to comment on what comes out of each of these stages, so that additional public outreach. And then for you as a planning commission, at the very end of the process, when we produce our environmental document, we'll be coming back to you for review and approval of that or certification of that. And so we've been busy this week running our consultants wild with 6 meetings. So we started on Tuesday at City Council and gave this presentation and got some great public comment, both from City Council members and the general public. And then last night, we were at the Airport Commission at our administration building on Firestone. And then yesterday during the day, we held 2 of those technical input committee meetings and the community input meetings. And so after this hearing today, we'll also have an open house at the airport admin building on Firestone Road. And that will be more of a meeting where you can talk one-on-one with airport staff and our consultants about certain aspects that you may have more interest in on the master plan. And so, like I said, there's plenty of meetings in the future to give more input as we start producing documents for you to review and options for you to look at. We'll have more input committee meetings later this spring, and then a public meeting as well. And then in the summer, we'll dive into the land use planning section and have input committee on that. And then the final stage is producing the map, which is the airport layout plan of what all of the things the master plan is deciding on will be. And so Sarah is the project manager for the project, and our email address is sba_mpu@santabarbaraca.gov. We really are requesting that everyone who is interested sign up for our interested parties list on our website, which is flysba.com/MPU. And then you'll be updated of all of these meetings that will be coming throughout this year and be able to give your input in it, even if we don't necessarily come to Planning Commission in some of those. So thank you very much, and we're all here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for your presentation, all of you. It was very nice to hear such a cohesive presentation. I will go ahead and open it up to our commissioners, and we will start with Commissioner DeLuccio. Is that from before, or is that new? No, I have a list. I just wanted to double check that was, I thought I'd cleared my screen. Was that from before?
I did have comments, but I can
Let's hold
wait.
on. Let's hold on. I'll keep it in order, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. So we will begin with Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know the FAA is paying for most of this work, 90%, as I recall. How much of what you're doing is driven in terms of what you're considering and what's put into the master plan is directed by FAA?
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. With the FAA funding, obviously, we have to follow their format and their guidance for what has to be included in a master plan. There are two aspects of the master plan that they review and approve, which is the forecast, as Hardy mentioned, and the final airport layout plan. So they want to make sure as we move forward that they have had the understanding of what we have in the plan, and that's put down on a piece of paper so that they know that this is well thought out. The process itself for the funding, there's the optional projects that we will bring forward that have to do with, say, the terminal and capacity, things like that. And then there's the mandatory projects that have to do with the changing conditions of the airfield, that kind of non-conforming, legal non-conforming that was mentioned earlier. So the FAA will look to make sure that we are adequately addressing any geometry issues of the taxiways and runways, things like that. But as far as the terminal and general aviation projects, things like that, that's all airport driven.
Okay, and another question is, my recollection is years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, the city airport established time frames for when, the latest that planes could come into land and the earliest they could take off in the morning. But that doesn't, the airport no longer has the ability to do that. It's dictated by the airlines or dictated by FAA?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Lodge. We are somewhat limited in what we can do as far as noise and timeframes at the airport. In 1990, there was some legislation that was passed that was really passed to make sure that the communities have access to the National Air Transportation System, and they didn't want individual communities to restrict that access. So if there were things in place, such as fines or other restrictions on airlines back in 1990, those could have been grandfathered and brought forward. All of the items that we had for Santa Barbara were all voluntary. So because there was nothing regulatory behind them, we still do have voluntary abatement procedures for the airport. We are working separately. We have been working collaboratively with the city of Goleta, also meeting with the county and other city of Santa Barbara residents to try to see if there's things that we can do better. Although we are somewhat restricted in what we have control over, we can always try to do better, and I think there are some areas that we can make some improvements. But as far as the time of the day that the airlines can fly, that is not something that we can mandate that they change.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You did just answer my question about funding, but I was curious about the cultural resources protection. It was mentioned. Could you tell us more about that, about the area or the work that's being done there?
So there's a couple of different aspects of that. One is obviously when we do a project protecting the cultural resources that may be underground. And that is something that we always have to look at through environmental for any project that we do. Specific to cultural resources on the airport, in that upper right-hand corner of the slide, we have the General Western Aero hangars. It's hit the news quite a bit lately with petitions to save those hangars. We have an ongoing study that we hope to have information back soon as to what are the options for those facilities. Staff at the airport is not pushing demolition or restoration at this point. We need to have the facts of what can actually be done with those, and we will be bringing those back to the decision makers to make a recommendation on how to move forward with them.
Thank you. Can you speak more to specifically to the Chumash resources?
Just obviously, the Shumash were big in this area, and so anytime that there is a project, we need to make sure that we're adequately addressing those cultural resources. And I don't know if Sarah wants to add, or Jessica wants to add anything to how we go about that process.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Boss. Much like when you have a general plan amendment or a specific plan, we're required by state law to do tribal consultation before we started this process. And so we did do that, and the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians took us up on that offer. And so we have been in consultation with them on the process of the master plan, and will continue to do so throughout.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of you for an excellent presentation. Following up on Commissioner Boss's comments on the hangars, that was obviously been in the news. I'm curious on two fronts. First of all, are those hangars used, or are they just historic and no longer used because they're too old?
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Yeah, so we do have several old hangars that are still in use at the airport, so age isn't necessarily something that affects use or not. Those facilities, unfortunately, are in very, very bad condition. So,
Okay, so
we
they're-
do not go inside of them at this point. There would have to be considerable amount of work done to be able to utilize those at all.
Okay, and is there a process similar to buildings for hangars where you can historically renovate them in a sensitive way to retain their historic character?
So the study that was being conducted right now has work done with a historian as well as an architect, and that will give us all of those answers and options of what can be done.
Okay, and then will that study become part of the master plan, or?
So it's a small piece of the master plan. The master plan isn't looking at that specifically, much like all of the other studies that Jessica had mentioned. All of those are incorporated into the master plan, but really the details of that are driven on that specific study. And much like the master plan, we do have a page on our website for those General Western Aero hangars as well, for people to sign up and receive updates as we go through that process.
Okay, great. And I gather quite a few people have signed up based on the publicity that's been received?
I don't have an exact number, but I've heard of several hundred,
His eyes
yes.
is nodding, yes, yes. Okay, fine, thank you. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about your guiding principle of economic vitality in relation to what I think on your slide was the non-aero spaces, of which there are quite a few. I think there's some that are empty lots and some that are buildings. Can you address that? I mean, I know, the most important component is the air traffic and the revenue from the air traffic. But it seems to me that there was one space, I think, and I don't know exactly where it is, but it's been available for rent but vacant for a long time, and it's not in the FAA. I gather none of these non-aero spaces, they're not in the purview of the FAA. They're outside of the, I did a project at SeaTac Airport, and there was definitely a delineation about, where the FAA is in charge and where you have a little bit of latitude, but not entirely latitude.
So the FAA does have some
Right.
involvement in all of our property.
Yeah.
But being outside of we call it outside of the fence, meaning outside of the aviation operations area, there is more flexibility in the types of uses. So it does not have to be aviation use on those properties. We do have a specific plan for the property north of Hollister, and so that's kind of our guiding document that we're using as we look towards development in the future. You are correct, there's a lot of just storage lots in there and a lot of older uses. We just hired a new properties manager and are kind of building up his team with the goal to look at all of that and try to have that an attractive, nice area that isn't just junk being stored all over the place. So we are looking at that. I'm not sure exactly which lot you're discussing that is vacant, but I know that we are looking at potential uses for all of those lots out there, and all of those projects would go through the normal city process for development.
Yeah, I think there was a square foot price, per square foot price on the lot, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the details of it, but
So-
I just, it seems though that, and I just hope that economic vitality in these non-aero spaces is really really gets some weight in your master plan, because I think this is another important revenue source for the airport.
Thank you, Commissioner. And also, so along 6100 Hollister is some of those newer buildings that we have where Dean's Coffee is. There is a second phase planned for that, and we're looking at how the numbers pencil out, whether it's something that the city and the airport department wants to move forward with, or whether it's something that we do an RFP and put that out more for private development. And so all of those factors are being looked at right now. It's very important to me as the director of the airport to have diversified revenue coming in to the airport, because you don't want to rely on just one industry in case there's a pandemic or other things. But also as a city department head, also looking for the greater good of the city and the community, and providing spaces for startup companies and other things helps everybody.
Right, okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And is there a place where we as members of the public can look at your specific plan? Do we have, is that on your website, or it is?
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe. Yes, it is. It's on the flysba.com webpage.
Okay,
You can
okay,
find
and-
it. And the most recent amendment is also posted, which I believe is 2018.
Okay, so there's an amendment to this specifically. And how old
Yes.
is this specific plan?
1997, 98.
Okay, another one of those, okay.
Thank you.
Boy, we love those, okay.
Not as old as 101 Garden Street.
Okay. And then, let me see here. Okay. So my last question is, you talked about 5% growth for in-plane passengers. So is that high, low, or average for an airport of Santa Barbara's SBA size?
So every airport is a little bit different. I think that is what I would call average across the nation for a lot of airports. Some airports obviously are going to be going down with changes in the industry. Santa Barbara is very fortunate to, with the community that we have here, there's a lot of interest to either base a business here or have recreation here. So we're fortunate in that we recovered very quickly from the pandemic, and we have seen some significant growth in the short term with the addition of Southwest Airlines. So that number really reflects, we don't anticipate a huge change like Southwest Airlines coming in, adding 4 destinations. It's going to be more organic growth of either upgauging the aircraft to a little bit larger aircraft to accommodate more passengers, potentially adding a route here and there as those come available over the future years. But we don't anticipate, major steep climbs like we experienced with Southwest.
Okay, so this is pretty average. When you look at the hardcore numbers, it looks huge, but so I'm.
I think Ms. Issa has another comment she would like to
Okay,
help out with
yeah.
that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Just one additional data point. I worked on the 2003 master plan for the airport as well, and I believe the forecast then, at that time, was 3%, so this is a little higher.
Okay, yeah, you're dating yourself there.
I know, I'm sorry. Thank you.
And Commissioner
Okay.
Wiscombe, if I might also add, the forecasted numbers that we see are our best guess based on what's going on in the industry at the time. And it could be lower, it could be higher. What we're presenting in the master plan is going to be improvements that we see as needed to meet that demand. But if we don't do any of those improvements, if we don't change the terminal at all, we fully expect that all of those passengers would be able to still continue to fly out of the Santa Barbara airport. The experience would not be very great. You might be sitting on an airplane waiting for a gate to open up, or you might not be able to get something to drink or eat because it's just so crowded. So really, these improvements that we're looking at are for the passenger experience. They're not directly related to the level of activity that we can have in the terminal. We can already accommodate that level of activity forecasted. It just would not be a good experience.
So it's experience, but it's also revenue.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
okay,
as there's more activity, the airport actually does better financially through a number of different aspects, including parking, rental cars, actual airline fees themselves, yes.
Right, okay, thank you. I think that's all my questions. Thank you all very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And before I call another one of my fellow commissioners, I have to admit, I made a mistake. I forgot to do public comment after the presentation. Can I just complete the questions and then do it at the end?
Yes, Chair Bonderson, you can
Okay.
do that, absolutely.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
fine.
I just wanted to make sure I caught myself. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Thank you. This is the third time I've heard this presentation, actually. I tuned into the council meeting yesterday, and I'm the liaison to the Airport Commission for the Planning Commission, so I was at your meeting last evening, and I want to commend you, because you guys are listening. This is the third time I've heard this, and you've incorporated community input already in regards to the noise abatements or the noise complaints, and you explained how the noise analysis that you're doing as part of the master plan could help some, but you're being realistic that it needs to be addressed separately. And also the historic hangars, that's another point of contention. So thank you for listening and starting to address this. So that's really good. I just have a couple of questions. I know that the current master plan was done in 2017, and I guess after 5 or 10 years, it's good to update. Is this going to be an update, or, because I know a lot of the stuff I imagine has not been implemented in that 2017 plan. Will some of that be carried over into the new plan and then being expanding on it?
So, thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. There's a couple of different aspects to that. So we are continuing to operate under the 2017 master plan, and so there are ongoing projects such as the FBO redevelopment, Southside project, things like that will continue to move forward. As we look at the alternatives, of course, we will look at this 2017 plan to see if some of those can carry forward. But if there's been changes to the region or the industry, some of those might have to be discarded and come up with new alternatives. So it's going to be a mix of both, but we do continue to move forward with the projects in the 2017 master plan up until the adoption of this plan, and we might shift a little bit, but we don't just pause waiting for this plan to be adopted.
Well, that's good. Also, when you mean conceptual designs, are you talking about the layout plan? Is that the same thing? You have to present conceptual plans, and it says that in the MA, you need to get approval on the layout plan. Are those different things?
So, thank you, Commissioner. The airport layout plan is really just almost like what you see on the screen right here, with just different layers that show different aspects of the airport, with a windrows to show which runways are used the most, and just blocks where buildings will be in the future. So that's not so much the conceptual plan. The conceptual plan that Ms. Issa had mentioned is really for the terminal, and that will get into the architectural detail type of drawings that will come back for your review as well.
Okay, so we're talking about traditional type of design review of a structure or something.
Correct.
The other thing is, I know that when the plan was done in 2017, the master plan, I guess you had a projection of the employments back then, and you already pretty much exceeded those employments. Was that a factor why you took on early doing another master plan?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, that's exactly as I mentioned earlier. With the addition of Southwest to many destinations, it was obviously met those forecasts earlier than we had anticipated through normal organic growth.
Okay, because in 2011, I think you had about 370,000 employments, and then it went up to 600,000 in 222, and then that's 10 years. And then in the next 20 years, you're just projecting it to go up another 300,000 to like 900,000?
So we've seen a lot of change in the industry, and the pandemic was definitely a part of that. There's a pilot shortage right now, and so the airlines are really focusing on getting the most that they can out of the pilots that are available. So a lot of airports have lost air service entirely. We were very fortunate that the airlines chose to remain flying here, and they've actually upgauged their airplane to what we call mainline aircraft. So rather than a regional airline flying all of the flights, we have United and American and Alaska and Southwest flying mainline aircraft, those larger narrow-body aircraft that were described earlier. So those numbers originally, when you go back even further, we're based off of 30-seat turboprops, maybe 50-seat regional jets, and now we're into the 70 to 90-seat regional jets and 150-seat narrow bodies. So the industry has drastically changed over the planning periods from those previous master plans.
I have one more question. This is a small hub airport, correct?
Correct.
When does it go from small hub to what's the next layer? And
So thank you for the question. I don't know if somebody, okay, yeah, if Brian can answer that. There's a specific FAA number to that, and I know we just barely passed the small hub number, so we're a ways off.
Yeah, so connecting hub is like SFO, Chicago, O'Hare. That's the normal term. When we say small hub, that's an FAA definition, which is a certain percentage of the entire country's passenger activity. And so there's a percentage of the country's activity that defines a small hub to a medium hub to a large hub. So a prominent example of a small hub is Santa Barbara or Chattanooga, Tennessee. A medium hub would be Sacramento, California, SMF. And then the large hub would be in LAX, SFO. There are approximately 30 large hubs. There are approximately 30 medium hubs. And there's about, I think, 90 or so small hubs in the country.
And we just recently went from non-hub status to small hub.
okay, that's interesting. Because I guess just one thing I want to say, and then I'll stop. I just wouldn't want to probably go beyond the small hub because I remember the airport when it was a lot smaller and
Non-hub, when it was non-hub.
when you had it, I guess the baggage was outside. You picked it up, and I just I like the improvements that were done to the airport, and but I really want to keep our small town feel. So that would just be my concern, that I wouldn't want to get probably to the next level.
And thank you for that comment. And just to add to that, it really doesn't relate to the number of flights or the number of destinations. It's just the number of passengers. So it's kind of a misleading term to think of non-hub to small hub. You could still have the same exact amount of destinations and flights depending on size of aircraft and such.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. Next, we have Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Well, thank you. This was a really informative presentation, and I absolutely love the Santa Barbara Airport, so thank you for all that you guys are doing. I feel like my fellow commissioners asked a lot of the questions that I was thinking about, but I just wanted to clarify. So the 5% average of the projected growth, that has to be approved by the FAA. That's not, is that what you said earlier?
So let me just clarify, that is not even approved by the FAA. That's just the anticipated traffic that the demand would have here. That's really driven by the community in how we develop around the airports and what generates that demand, and the airline's desire to capture those passengers that are local here. So the FAA doesn't necessarily approve specific flights coming in and out, other than maybe some environmental approvals, things like that. So that would just be the demand materializing in the community and the airlines seeking to capture those passengers to go to those destinations.
Right, but the 5%, like the idea that it will be 5% growth, is that like substantiated by the FAA, or do we just kind of, that's your department?
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Sorry.
So yes, so
Okay.
the FAA comes up with what they call a terminal area forecast, and that is a forecast that is issued to all of the airports across the country. And so they don't take a specific look at Santa Barbara.
Oh,
So
okay.
our consultants actually, the forecast that was presented is with all of the information, taking a deeper dive into what Santa Barbara is as an airport and as a community, and coming up with that forecast. The forecast is actually very close to what the FAA terminal area forecast is. And so the FAA does have to approve that forecast to make sure that we're not being overly conservative or overly optimistic.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for answering. And then my last question, you guys mentioned about the electric vehicle takeoff under the, I think, general aviation side. So that has to do with, could you explain that a little bit? Is that drones? Like, are we planning for the future of when people can get into an individual aircraft and then like deposit them back in Sacramento? Like, is that what you mean? Because you said an individual person or goods, and I just want to know kind of what that means.
So definitely the industry is changing, and there's a lot of new technology coming out. And one of those areas is in vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that are electric powered aircraft. And there's a number of different companies developing those getting certifications initially with pilots, but the ultimate goal is to have them be autonomous and be able to come and go without a pilot. They could be used for cargo, FedEx, UPS type cargo. They could be used for passengers, and right now they're looking at that, 4 to 6 passenger capacity, but ultimately in the future they could get much larger. It's very early right now because they're not certified, they're not actually operating, but we do anticipate that Santa Barbara, with its proximity to Los Angeles specifically, could see some use of those types of aircraft. To get to, say, Sacramento, that's a much further distance, so not in the short term, but definitely as they develop these electric aircraft, their ranges and the capacities will for sure go up.
And is this type of, all this research included in the study that was noted on the slide about other studies that the city's working on? And I assume that study is not required, right? That's us deciding to do that, to understand what more improvements we can be doing to that?
Thank you, Commissioner. We do have to look at everything regarding the industry. So specific to those aircraft, we're looking at electrification requirements at the airport to be able to charge those aircraft and areas for them to be able to come and go. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's fairly it's too quick to really understand where that industry is going yet, but we need to be prepared for the future. And so the areas that we're looking at right now is just the electrification and the location for them.
Thank you so much. This was very helpful. That's it.
Thank you. And next we have Commissioner Lodge again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind my colleagues, some of you may not know, that the airport is an enterprise fund, which means that they have to be self-supporting. And that's why the economic vitality is an important part of what they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. It's always valuable for you to share your reminders with us, your knowledge. I'm going to go ahead and speak next if there are no other lights. I wanted to start by ultimately thanking you. I've sat through at least one of these presentations in the past few years, and I also had the pleasure of watching your presentation at council the other day, and I just want to say this, it just keeps getting better. I actually think this is really fascinating stuff. I could look at your diagrams all day. I feel like you should, go into the classrooms and teach little kids all about this stuff. I just think it's endlessly rewarding to learn about. So that being said, I have to admit I don't remember exactly who said what I'm about to ask, but one of you commented on noise concerns. I believe it was you, sir, but that you're handling it. It's sort of outside of the scope of this project. I was interested to build on not just the noise concerns, the time concerns that Commissioner Bosch brought up, which landing and takeoff, and you don't have a lot of control on that. How do you take our community's concerns and share it with the people who do have control? How do we get that stepping stone to the right ears?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Bonderson. So it's very a complicated issue when you look at an airport, especially with 3 runways, different types of activity with from flight training to corporate jets to airlines and cargo. So there's no one answer that addresses all of the different concerns that the community has. So the airport's responsibility first is to listen to what those concerns are. We do have a noise page on our website where we post noise reports. We were a little bit behind in that for a while, so I'm happy to say we are all caught up. And so we look at those noise concerns and first identify if there is anything that is just out of the ordinary that we can work with an operator and try to address. From there, it gets much more complicated. So we have approaches and departures that are set by the FAA that come in and out of the airport, and all of the airlines and most corporate jets are flying on those specific approaches and departures, and they are very rigid in where the aircraft fly over. And then there's visual type flight rules, and that's where we have those noise abatement corridors that the aircraft, we request that they stay offshore and make the turn in over the open space and come into the airport and encourage users to use that. So the one part that we have the most concerns with the residents over is corporate aircraft flying into the airport, flying over some of the communities rather than out over the ocean. And unfortunately, up until now, that's been a little bit of a limitation in technology. because the way that our instruments in the aircraft work is kind of straight line off of the runways. With the invention of GPS technology and different types of approaches, that has improved and gotten better over time. So all of the airlines, except for one, which we're working with, have developed proprietary approaches that they can fly in, and that has definitely improved things and made things a lot better. So we are working with the FAA to develop a specific approach that would enable the corporate aircraft to utilize as well. And I wish Greg, our noise operations supervisor, was here, because he has a good way of stating it, and I'll probably get it a little bit wrong, but as the FAA looks at those approaches coming into the airport, Santa Barbara is one point on the map, and all of the aircraft have to access the National Airspace System, and there's different routes and other things. So if you adjust this point a little bit, as he would say, it's like a spider web. You're pulling on the whole system. So it takes a lot of time to develop those approaches, and we continue to work on that, and we have had support from Congressman Carvajal's office to keep that going. So those are all things that are in the works, and we continue to look at those, and like I said, where there are improvements that can be made, those are things that we're looking at. Unfortunately, not all of them occur quickly, and we are still an airport, and there are going to be some noise impacts that we are unable to abate. And so we just need to set the expectations and listen to the community and engage the community, and not just say that this is a problem we can't do anything about.
It's such a good answer, and I think the airport is one of those examples that each time we see you, there's leaps and bounds of progress. Then we look back and we're like, oh, we were really concerned about that back then, but it's been solved. So hopefully maybe the next time we see you, this will be not as big of an issue, and a lot of the community will be more, satisfied with some of the improvements. I'm glad to know that you're always actively taking those into consideration. Another part of that puzzle, but we haven't talked quite about, is the, I believe we have, you called it corporate or primary paths of flight. Then we have secondary ones, which are sort of, you can kind of skip back towards the mountains. Are those also within the jurisdiction of your control, or are those also outside of your immediate jurisdiction?
So, thank you, Chair Bonderson. So, as I mentioned, it gets very complicated because we have 3 runways. So the main east-west runway is runway 725. That's where all of the airlines use, and most of the corporate jets. It's rated for higher weights. It has all of our instrument landing system, things like that. We also have our crosswind or secondary runways that run north-south. And the FAA controls every aircraft that is, once you take off. We're what's called a Class Charlie airspace, which means we're a little bit busier than some other airspace. So we actually have approach controllers that are just downstairs in the tower that are also helping to guide aircraft in, and then they switch over to the tower, and then they, clear them to land. So on any given day, those controllers are very sensitive to the community. They want to help out, but if the airspace becomes busier, then their options are limited, and they may have to put some of the smaller aircraft over. They try to keep them over the freeway rather than over houses, but they have to remain somewhat distant from other airplanes, and there's specific requirements for that. I'm not an air traffic controller, but as it becomes more and more busy, their ability to stick within those guidelines for noise abatement sometimes is limited.
This is so interesting to me. I could go on for days, but we're not going to focus on that any further. I appreciate your patience, and you're a very good speaker. You made it very simple for us to understand. I mean, I completely felt better when I heard you explain it, so thank you.
Thank you.
My next question goes into land use, and I have a question. I don't remember your name, sir, but you had mentioned, Carl? Or Hardy. You had mentioned at the very end of your presentation about doing your best to plan ahead for future obstructions, and you listed antennas, buildings, trees, and such. Could you talk to us a little bit about where you see that on a map? Like, is it on the interior of the airport boundaries, on the exterior? How do you kind of project that?
No, that's a good question. On the map, maybe the study area map would be good to describe that. Thank you. So typically, the on-airport obstructions are mitigated with red lights. They're usually less than 35 feet tall. So most of the area in the study area doesn't have anything. You may see antennas like on Hollister that are pretty low. But when you have other jurisdictions, for example, the city of Goleta or Santa Barbara or the county, approving development permits for vertical infrastructure, whether it's an antenna or a building or natural things like trees, that's part of the master plan process, is to really go out in those areas and do an obstruction survey using LiDAR and then taking a photograph and flattening it and looking at the height of those obstructions. And then we provide that in the master plan, and that gives the airport additional direction on how to mitigate that, whether it's doing a tree removal program. I don't suspect that's going to be the case at Santa Barbara Airport, but also working with other jurisdictions like the Airport Land Use Commission and other jurisdictions to have design review processes to understand that when somebody wants to build something, that the airport has a say in understanding its vertical height and how that may restrict air traffic.
And when it's outside of the airport boundaries, what is your process to work with the agencies, whether it's Goleta or the county or city?
Yeah.
How do you interact with them to encourage care in these designs?
Yeah, that's a great question. The comprehensive land use plan that's adopted by all the multiple jurisdictions kind of governs the relationship between those and how the design review process will come back to airport staff. That's typically how it does, and I'm not sure if Ms. Iza wants to answer. I'm sure you have a lot of experience with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the question. Mr. Bullock is completely right. We're lucky that we have good relationships with all of our surrounding neighbors. Our approach is early and often with consultation, and we've worked through it. Specifically, UCSB with the Big Dorm project, we've been involved in those discussions, as well as FAA. Thank you.
And if I might also add, Chair Bonderson.
Of course.
Some of those obstructions may not be something that's a building that's proposed or anything like that. It could be a tree that was planted 40 years ago and grows into the approach surfaces. And that would just be a collaboration with the property owner to work together to try to mitigate that and maybe even replace with something that was like it was 40 years ago and gives us another 40 years before it reaches that height again.
Right, this is all very interesting. I appreciate the explanation because I think it's a big part of your future thinking, right, on a master plan. And my last question has to do with your projected increase of services. Obviously, a projected increase of service will eventually lead to projected increase of employment. And I was curious to know if your team works with the local agencies, again, the city, the county, and Goleta, for any type of housing projections as well to help support the increase of potential workers that may come out of this master plan.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson, and we can get some help from staff too. But I will say that we don't take a look at the housing part of it, but the airport is included in the overall community plans as they're looking at all of that.
Okay. And I just want to give you all the opportunity. Is there any other staff member that would like to add?
Also, we are in interactions with a variety of different organizations that are doing other kinds of plans. The City of Goleta is doing an economic development plan right now. They had a public meeting last night, which Chris and I have sat in on those meetings. And housing and the jobs imbalance is a big part of that. And so one of the suggestions recently from Councilman Carriaco was to hold more joint job fairs, and so that's something we were working with them. And then also the conversation went on to holding more outreach with the Coastal Housing Coalition and looking at how to get the word out about resources that already exist for housing to the community. And so we are active in these other organizations also.
Thank you. And just to conclude this, I want to ask a question that you sort of implied already in your answer, but I'm going to ask it a little bit more poignantly. With your projected increase of service, then obviously employment and an estimate of how many, potential new workers that would lead to, do you share that information as well with the different agencies? Is that sort of how they have your numbers on a more regular basis? Or is it
I haven't dealt with that here
done a
yet,
different
so
way?
is it-
How is that information shared, I guess, is the cleaner way of asking that
Sure.
question.
The airport, as part of the master plan, the airport will not project job growth.
Okay.
Job growth projected by others into the future is accounted for and reflected in the forecast of activity at the airport. That forecast of activity will be documented in the master plan, and metropolitan planning organizations and other economists in the region will typically look at the forecast to possibly make econometric projections using that data.
And I know that we do share information with like the UCSB Economic Study and even some more state organizations. California Airports Council is just about to do another study, and we do provide that information as requested for other groups that are looking at that.
Thank you. This was very, very informative. I appreciate all the team pitching in. That concludes my questions. I'm going to close our question period. And before we go into basically comments to close the, may I go ahead and open public comment now? Do we have any slips or remote public comment at this time, Mrs. Esparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do have one in-person speaker slip for Elizabeth Crawford. Ms. Crawford, if you can come up to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to collapse everything into one. I had attempted to come to the earlier 2 meetings, but because of rolling migraines, I was not able to make it. First of all, the airport is located 100% in Goleta, and Goleta takes 100% of the hits. I've heard all kinds of concerns here about revenue generation and so forth, yet Goleta takes all the hits. Mayor Perotti has stated that they're looking into possibly having to sue because of this. So I don't think that it's quite the friendly relationship that has been projected here. I'll make this quick. I had to write a letter to my homeowners association president, and I'll just go with it. Good morning, Carolyn. Well, the jets started coming in low over our houses as usual at about 5:30 each morning. They continue all day long until 11 o'clock p.m., sometimes later. I've had recurring migraines since I moved back to Goleta last summer, about 2 a month on average, and my strong $1,000 a month pharmaceutical medicine does not always work, and my doctor is quite concerned. Wasn't able to make it. I've looked over the $1 million study the city commissioned on the airport expansion, and I see tons of dry numbers that shouldn't have taken, no offense, $913,000 to collect. No mention of noise studies, no mention of traffic studies. The first time I hear about it is when I have to come and show up that they will be done and that they're not part of this plan, project, and that they are not going to look at the noise and traffic impacts on our communities. $916,000, and that is not even included. I've heard about Chumash artifacts, I've heard about drainage and sea rise. Again, not one word about the real impacts on this. I took map snapshots of the areas to the north, south, and east, and note that the airport maps conveniently exclude all of the residences who take the noise and disturbances from the significantly increased air traffic. Again, a massive oversight. I've suffered greatly, as I know we all have, by living directly under the flight path. I could throw a rock and hit some of these jets, big-bodied jets coming in day after day. I tried making noise complaints. One day, I just decided to make a noise complaint every time one was egregious enough to send me back inside. After 25 calls in about 5 hours, I just gave up. So it's not, whatever reports you get are not even accurate, because I can't keep up with it. Gardening is one of my great joys, and the dramatically increased air traffic triggers rolling migraines in me and often chases me back indoors. Was that 3 minutes? To be chased back into your house with your hands over your ears for the prices that we pay for those homes, the quality of life has degraded massively. And the property values are degrading massively. And to be able to be forced to take 100% of the hit while Santa Barbara sits here and talks about job development and stuff, Goleta might have to sue, and it's not a happy situation.
Thank you
For
so much.
$916,000, it looks like that was specifically excluded. Shameful.
Thank you for coming today. It's always important to hear these types of comments. I appreciate you.
Whether or not they're considered.
Are there any other speakers today, Ms. Esparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Turning to virtual participants, I do have a raised hand for George Midwin.
Wonderful.
George Midwin, we just sent you an unmute request. Perfect. Mr. Midwin, we have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is George Midwin. I'm speaking on behalf of the Santa Barbara Aviation Historical Preservation Coalition. The Santa Barbara Airport has a unique historical entity that represents early aviation, which does not exist in but a few locations in the entire U.S. Those that do cannot compare to the context that the General Western Aero hangars present. There are in the very same location as constructed some 91 years ago. They remain, although in poor condition, much the same with original materials inside and out. Much of the immediate surrounding property remains as it was. The site is in a remote and relatively quiet position on the airport. Simply standing in front of the hangars, you can feel the history they represent. The historical significance of the hangars has been documented in a number of surveys commissioned during the past 20+ years. Every consultant has come to the same conclusion that the hangars merit national historical recognition. As part of the current airport master plan, the General Western hangars are included in the environmental inventory. The inventory will rely on yet another survey of the hangars and its surroundings. It is anticipated that this survey that is currently being undertaken will also conclude the same results as well. However, to date, no effort has been made to even provide some means of protection to further preclude deterioration, much less seek any type of historical recognition. Action must be taken before this valued historical entity is further ravaged by the effects of time. At some point, those in position of governing must come to the realization that too much time has elapsed without a final decision on the outcome of these hangars. At last Tuesday's City Council meeting, the airport discussed the master planning efforts. Included key elements presented were alternatives, funding, and community involvement. Regarding the hangars, there are several alternatives that could be considered: a community center, multi-use facility, restaurant, museum, and possibly others. Funding possibilities that could augment the airport's budget may exist with the public sector or grants. As for community involvement, it is apparent that as information regarding the possible outcomes of the hangar is available to the citizens, more and more people have begun to realize their importance. To date, in response to Commissioner Wiscombe's question, a petition to save the hangars has been signed by over 550 individuals, including Fermina Murray, who spoke at last City Council meeting. There are a number of issues that the airport must address as it continues in operation and development of the master plan. I would like to implore the city, the airport management, the airport commission, and the planning commission to place more attention on the future of these hangars before it's too late. Again, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do not have any more raised hands, giving one last opportunity. We have one more raised hand from Catherine Mizrahi. Ms. Mizrahi, I'm going to go ahead and send you an unmute request. Please unmute, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hey, this is not a comment, it's more of a question. When I'm looking at the master plan update, the pink on the runways, so are you guys expanding the runways, making them longer?
I think it would be okay if we answer that question.
We're not looking at any runway expansion.
No? Okay, so if it, okay, it just, I was confused. I thought that it was expanded, because in your presentation, you said the main plane that you guys are expecting in the future is the 737-800. But then you were also saying that you were expecting bigger aircraft, and I was just curious which type of aircraft you guys were expecting to be coming in and out of the airport.
If I might just request, we have an open house today at the airport, and we can address a lot of individual questions, and I think that would be the appropriate time to have some back and forth.
Okay, thank you. That's it then.
Thank you, and hopefully you'll be able to attend that or get yourself or your, friends and family there. I think it's important to get you your answers. Commissioner Wiscom, would you like to say? No, that was from before. I'm looking here.
If I can just go ahead and officially close public
Yes,
comment?
I-
Thank you.
please do so.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do not have any more speaker slips, and if there are no more raised hands, then we just received written correspondence from Tom Modugno, which was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. With that, I'll close public comment and give it back to the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sparza. And before I call on you, Commissioner Wiscom, would you be kind enough just to let me know, is it in response to public comment?
Yes.
Yes, please go forward.
Mr. Hastert, you talked about the open house this afternoon. Is there going to be any recording of that? I assume you're going to do a presentation and then let people, how will it be handled? And will the last public commenter be able to go online and get something from that?
So the nice thing about this open house, if somebody is able to attend, is actually we just have boards set up around the room with all of these different slides. And we will have staff available, including myself, to just have one-on-one discussion and answer those questions very directly. In addition to that, we also have the airport development website and an email address. And so I'm happy to meet, and my staff is also happy to meet with anybody if they're not able to attend that open house. Through email or in person, through just scheduling a meeting, we're happy to go over any of the details that any members of the public may have.
Okay, thank you for that. So I would ask staff then to repeat that email address. I know you gave it to us earlier, and perhaps just repeat the website, the flysba.com, just for edification for the public. If anyone, can't attend the workshop, they have another means. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscom. So our email address for any of those questions that you'd like to ask us is sba_MPU@santabarbaraca.gov. And you can direct your questions there. We could set up a meeting from that email also. Additionally, if you want to sign up for updates in the process going on over the rest of the year, please go to flysba.com/MPU, and there's an interested parties sign-up list where you just put your email in and you're on the list for the next updates.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner Wiscom. I appreciate that you took that. I would have done it too. I think it's very important for our public to have our attention. So at this time, I'm going to open up a comment period. We're not deliberating or voting. We're just adding any comments that any of the commissioners may like to add as a statement. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this time? Please, Commissioner Wiscom.
I really, I appreciate the presentation and all the work that's gone in. I think there's components of this where public input is going to be essential. And one is noise. I think that's come across loud and clear over many months now. The hangars, definitely. I think that's important. And I think it's important for people to understand which you conveyed very well here, the delineation between what FAA is stringent on and what areas give you people the city of Santa Barbara some latitude that's out of that FAA really restrictive zone, and how it all works together, because I know it's very difficult at the airport. I just recall when I worked on a project at SeaTac Airport, plants were very important because of birds. So, and people don't think about those things. It's a very complicated, an airport's a very complicated site. So I think your prepare, promote, address, and involve is a very good principles to have as you go through this process. And I thank you very much for the presentation.
Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the comments of Commissioner Wiscombe, as I normally do. I really appreciated the presentation. I feel like I learned a lot. I did also appreciate the public comment that was made, and I apologize that that didn't happen before our deliberation. You know, I used to live in Goleta and right in the flight travel path, and it definitely is loud. It is really noisy. But I think that, you know, this discussion was really helpful in educating us on really what's in your purview and what's in the FAA's. It seems that you guys have done a really robust job at trying to engage the community, understand what their concerns are, and then, you know, react appropriately in the confines of not overstepping the FAA. So I really appreciate this work, and I look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. And since I have no other speakers, I would like to take a moment to personally thank Ms. Crawford for your time here today. The questions I was aiming at with regard to noise and the different flight patterns gently builds in the direction that you're going. But I do want to say I grew up in the Nolita area. It wasn't called Nolita back then. I don't want to date myself. But you know, there were a lot fewer flights. And now when I go home to visit my parents or I go visit friends who are located in that neighborhood, it's very challenging to sit through a conversation or a meal. It's, to me personally, it's also a little bit frightening to see how close some of the airplanes are. And, you know, I would never choose to live in that area, but some people don't have that choice, and some people bought their homes long before the flights were as frequent. You know, we see changes there. It's natural part of the evolution of growth, but that was part of my question of why we don't have more traffic over the ocean. And I'm sure there's logical explanations. I hope that we can make our public more aware of why and how to advocate for more improvement. I think that our community deserves that. I wanted to ask just one more time, is the noise and the traffic issues specifically out of your jurisdiction, or is because those are managed elsewhere? Could you just remind me of your role?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. As I mentioned, it's a very complex issue. Some of it is within our control to encourage operators to do things that are different that we see might be helpful. The FAA is definitely responsible for those approaches, and we do work with them to try to make improvements. So it's we could sit down and sit for a couple of hours and go over a lot of those details, and we have with some of the concerned residents. And I would invite even the person who made the public comment. We're available to sit one-on-one and go over a lot of those details with our noise person, our operations supervisor responsible for that one area. And it's, like I said, it's very complex.
And would it make any difference if some of those concerned citizens were able to communicate or contact some of the decision makers directly instead of bringing it to you when your hands may be tied or it's not your jurisdiction? Does it make any difference?
So I don't want to discourage people from following up as they see appropriate, but I can tell you that the noise concerns from our community are definitely relayed up to our local congressperson as well as the FAA.
Thank you. I'm really glad that we got that in a recorded hearing. I think it's very important to share that type of information and help increase the awareness all the time in our community. We need to know where to go when we have problems. So with that, if our city attorney, Mr. Domus,
Well,
please.
just to add to that, Mr. Hastert's point too.
Yes.
There's case law. It's a very complex issue. It revolves around a lot of issues. There's tons of case law. There's case out of the Supreme Court out of Burbank, for example. So generally, Planning Commission deals with a lot of police power activities, health, safety. The city has those powers. When it comes to FAA, though, there have been a lot of where the courts have said, your police power stops at the door when it comes to federal jurisdiction. So, you know, it's a lot more complicated, as Mr. Hastert said, than just like what you have complete control over or not, especially when you're involving the federal government. A lot of times, even cities have sued the FAA and trying challenging on noise. It's really not the other cities that cities are suing other cities. A lot of times it's actually the FAA. So just wanted to add that because the commission seemed interested in that point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for chiming in. I appreciate you turning on your light. I think it's always really important because, again, there are real life problems and complaints, and we want to make sure that we approach it in the right way, that we can get that information to you. Thank you again for being here and sharing your concerns. At this time, we can go ahead and close this item, and we will move on to our final item of the day, which is liaison reports. Ms. DeBusk is leaving us. Thank you for your participation today. Have a great day. And we will begin with the staff hearing officer. Do you have anything to report?
Nothing to report, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to do that as part of mine. I was just going to, okay. Just so you all know, I'm out of order. A is my Planning Commissioner Academy presentation, but I'm happy to continue. Let's do it last. So I will go on to continue. Commissioner Lodge, you have a presentation today?
Yes, a brief one. Last night, the Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Citizens Advisory Committee, the folks that look after the creeks, met, and they had a report on cleanup statistics for fiscal year 2022. It's just amazing the amount of stuff that got picked up, including 5,852 feces, 496 appliances, and people, refrigerators, they bring them to the edge of the creek and then, and Marburg will pick up major appliances twice a year. You get 2 times a year, without extra charge. So I'm bringing this up partly so that to help inform anybody who might be watching who might have an appliance to dispose of, or other large piece of furniture. Like, I'm sure some of you have seen mattresses out on the sidewalk too. There were 60,558 cigarette butts, and it's just to keep all this stuff out of the ocean, to keep our creeks clean. And this all comes from the encampments that are in the creek beds, which is all part of the homeless issue. They also had a report on the budget for 2024, which is the second year of the 2-year budget, and they do get the 2%, an additional 2% that was approved by the voters in 2008 of the bed tax, and goes directly to the for creeks restoration, and they have the projects for 2024. There are 13 capital programs. 11 are for creek restoration, which is the main part of what they do. There is also a bacterial reduction program and a stormwater treatment retrofit, some stormwater retrofit, water treatment retrofit projects. A large part of their expenditures for capital improvements are from grants that they're able to get. So that they're very successful at that. Although during fiscal year 21, 22, and 23, that disappeared because people were spending their philanthropy was going to other projects during the pandemic. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Did they by any chance speak about any type of enforcement or system where they are working on keeping the encampments or living within the lines of the creek bed? Them out of the creek bed?
They do. Commissioner Boss probably knows a lot about this, but they do work with the people. They give them, they tell we're going to come back in such and so many days and we'll clear this stuff out if you don't yourself. And they do work with them to a certain extent to try to get them into services and headed toward
There.
some kind of shelter. In terms of what they go on, most of the, they have a 100% response within the same day of a report of pollution or some kind of thing, and they really get out there fast. Most of the reports are on commercial sites where somebody washes down an empty trash thing or something and the water runs into the street. That's a no-no. And then next largest source of pollution is construction sites, where the materials, they rinse out some concrete thing and it ends up in the street, which is then runs down in the gutter and then ultimately into the creeks. And then the next most common is residential properties. One of the members of the committee commented on how much stuff there was that was picked up, and actually Cameron Benson, who's head of all these programs, said actually this is progress. It's less than it's been.
It's incredible. Thank you. Commissioner Boss, did you want to chime in on
Yes.
something you know?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner Lodge. I think it would be beneficial if we had maybe a breakdown between cleanups and stats between encampments and just the general public. I don't know how many of our unhoused neighbors are dumping appliances and mattresses or that they're responsible for all the cigarette butts. So I want to make sure that we have that distinction when we're reporting to the public.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other reports at this time? I have a very quick ABR report, and it is from April 17th, last Monday. It's a project that came before us. You'll all probably remember the Dwight Murphy Field renovation project. And the reason I wanted to bring it to your attention is because it received an in-progress review, and it received very, very favorable feedback from the majority, or I should even say all of the ABR members. So it was specifically focused on the playhouse structure and the relocation of the restrooms. So it continues to move forward. It's a very exciting and positive project for our community, and I wanted to give you all an update. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I flipped the first item with the second item, but I'd like to end with the Planning Commissioner Academy report. I had the great pleasure to go to the Academy, basically a conference for planning commissioners this year. It was held in Garden Grove in Orange County, and it lasted 3 days from March 29, 30, and 31. And I have put my report into some takeaways to keep it kind of light and easy. My first takeaway was that all planning commissioners should be thoroughly trained and to be regularly monitored, because if we overstep our ethical obligation, the penalty could be a misdemeanor and we could end up in jail. And I let Mr. Doimus, if you have anything to comment about. This specifically is Government Code 1090, which prohibits any employee or officer from having any financial interest in any contract made by them in their official capacity or by any board or body of which they are members. This applies to personal financial interest and that of family members. Now, we all have seen that before, but it was really interesting to me how often they talked about this. I mean, it literally was discussed in multiple presentations I saw. Not sure why it was so important, but it was repeated very, very many times. I had a very productive conversation with Eric Nelson. He is on the board of directors of the League of California Cities. He's also a planning commissioner in Dana Point. It was one of my highlights of my experience. We had a wonderful conversation in which I shared with him something that I'd learned recently about the FPPC. The FPPC gives access to a program called PREP. It stands for Commissioners Political Reform Education Program, and it's a course regarding statements of economic interest, and how the program ultimately educates anyone at all who is required to fill out Form 700, which we all do. Our staff does. And there's a lot of people in both official or appointed positions, as well as people working in any of the agencies that have to fill out this form. And I found the program was beyond excellent. I learned things that I didn't even know I needed to know. And I think it should be made available to anyone and everyone who has to fill out this form, whether they choose to watch it or take the course or not, just to have that information available, because we always seem to have questions about it and nowhere to really ask the questions. He had never heard about this training. He was really interested in it, and we discussed and brainstormed a bit. And so he's now planning to take this information up to the Board of the League of California Cities to find possible ways to legally request access to the program for all of us and all of the other people who need to fill out that form within our state. So I'm hoping that we'll see something, it'll benefit everyone. The next thing that I was really impressed with was that some cities provide regular training and email updates on annual Senate bills that affect land use, and they include many discussions at the end of shorter hearings for commissioners to ask questions and learn. Have you seen that before in your previous position as a planning commissioner?
Yes, and I'm wondering why we don't do it here.
Oh, maybe we will. Maybe this is a door opener. One of the activities I enjoyed the most, I thought it was absolutely beautifully planned and a kind of a breath of fresh air in the middle of all the heavier topics, was a planning commission Jeopardy. And I am a lover of trivia, and I loved, Jeopardy, so I was really into it. But there was an opportunity to learn. There was so much learning because they'd ask a question you don't know the answer to, and everybody was on, the edge of their seat wanting to know the answer, and then they would explain it. And they had a series of city attorneys that were the game leaders, so it was really, really fun. The next point is that resisting housing quotas is a uniting factor across California in all of the cities, both coastal and inland areas. Thought that was a fun fact, unfortunate fact. And then I'd say one of my greatest takeaways, so some of these are fun takeaways, some of these are, initial takeaways, but my greatest takeaway in an area where there was quite a bit of focus during the conference was the role of local and state journalists, and how journalists should be supporting the efforts of the Planning Commission and city councils by helping to educate and update their readers accurately and unbiasedly about the limitations of the boards and the commissions, focusing on the cost of living, the cost of housing development, and how the state mandates and annual requirements are setting the local governments up for continuous failure. My favorite quote of the conference was during the closing remarks when the final keynote speaker, his name was Dan Walters, stated, and I quote, "Journalists show up after the event or war is over and shoot the wounded." And I found it was really interesting because this topic came up a bit. There was a lot of questions and answers, open forum to ask during this this final speaker's time. And kind of the overall consensus that he made was that every community has this problem, and in his opinion, it falls on each journalist or reporter if they choose to help by promoting responsible journalism. And that way they can be a part of the growth and the solution in every community. Just ultimately proper awareness so that we're all on the same page and we know what we need to do as a team, as a group, as a community. And my conclusion, my last takeaway, and something I've already spoken to Allison and staff about, is to consider making the Planning Commissioners Academy available to every new commissioner upon their initiation into this position. It takes place every March, and it would be an incredible and extremely beneficial training experience in the first year of taking on this role. Even if we have land use knowledge or other experiences in this field. I was extremely impressed with the fact that the majority of commissioners that were in attendance, most of the people I spoke with during this conference, were in their first year, and many told me that in their communities, multiple commissioners are sent, and a few, They even had all of their commissioners, or the majority of their commissioners, even though they weren't in their first year. And it helped to build camaraderie, refresh and increase knowledge and confidence, especially in the less experienced commissioners. And they were the ones that were asking the most questions. I thought that was extremely valuable. And that concludes my presentation. Not sure if anyone has any questions, or we don't have any questions, so I'm just going to wrap up our hearing today. Oh, yes, you do have a question. Go ahead.
Actually, I
Commissioner
don't have a
Wiscombe.
question. I just have a follow-up on something I didn't know until a couple of years after I'd been on the Planning Commission. You mentioned the FPPC, which is the Fair Political Practices Commission. They also have a service just for fellow commissioners, so you should know about it. It takes some time, but if you have a hearing coming up where you're not sure if you have a conflict of interest or not, you can contact them and via email, and Ms. Ostringer, Mr. Dormus would be able to give you the information. We don't need it today.
Sure. Or contact one of us, Ms. Ostringer, too.
And I think when my situation came up, it was a situation where a project was coming where the house wasn't in my zone of recusal, but the driveway was.
Oh, my God.
And so I actually wrote to them and got an answer back that said that I should recuse myself. So I did. But that's very helpful for commissioners to know if you have any conflicts at all or you think you might have a potential conflict. And as Mr. Dormus said, you can contact, I think Ms. Ostringer was the one that gave me the information and the recommendation to contact them. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. I just think it's so valuable for us all to share our unique experiences and to give each other those types of resources. Thank you for sharing your story. And I hope that, as we move forward and we work together to make this experience better for all of us, that we have more and more resources that we share. So thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure to go to this Planning Commissioners Academy, and I just want to thank staff for sending me and giving me that opportunity. We will go ahead and conclude our April 20th, 2023 Planning Commission hearing. It is 2:56. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.